conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
Today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, Representative Daniel Grossberg has come under fire once again, this time from the Young Democrats in Kentucky. Last week we covered under the episode that's titled Grossberg. So if you don't watch the show each and every day, well, not watch it, but listen to it each and every day on the podcasting platforms, you need to do so. You can head on over to theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com and take a listen to the show. Comes out nearly every day. Last couple of weeks, of course, I've had a day or two where I've had to take it off. We've had a lot going on, unfortunately, where I haven't been as reliable, but we've still been getting out 3, 4, sometimes 5 episodes a week. So if you want to stay up to date and catch up with it, head on over to theandrewshow.com, because if you're listening to the show that comes out way more often than the once a week video episode / radio episode, well, you would know that we had an episode titled Grossberg that detailed how Daniel Grossberg was coming under fire for some reported sexual misconduct with lobbyists and other activists who come to the Capitol to try to get him to pass things, sending them inappropriate messages. Well, now that's been piled on. The Young Democrats have went ahead and jumped onto that bandwagon. I'll tell you why this tells me, likely speaking, he's probably guilty of pretty similar to what he's being accused of. Of course, we don't know for sure, but he's probably pretty guilty. I'll go into exactly the details of that. We see a recent example coming out of Lexington from the 6th District Congressman Andy Barr of exactly why we need term limits. We're hearing a lot of discussion about term limits at the national level for the Supreme Court, something I'm against. I'll go into that. But why do we need term limits for the federal houses, but maybe not for the state or local houses in Kentucky? I'll go into exactly why I think that's the case. And finally, the Louisville Police Department woes continue as the sexual harassment handling that led to the Chief Jacqueline's resignation, or was kind of got the ball rolling. I think what led to is probably that with all the other constant issues she's been having. Well, now a lawsuit has been filed. We're getting more details into exactly what's going on over there. And let me tell you, it is gross. It's disgusting. So we'll have all that and more today on the show. As I said earlier, if you want to listen to the show each and every day that we put out an episode, head on over to theandrewshow.com, hit the Listen Now tab. You can also reach out to the show by emailing us. You can email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. You can also head on over to theandrewshow.com and hit the Contact tab. So as I mentioned at the top, Daniel Grossberg, Representative Grossberg out of Louisville, has come under fire for some sexual misconduct with the ladies. Reported sexual misconduct. He hasn't been fully investigated yet. This came to light when the Herald-Leader wrote an article regarding his behavior under investigation from the LRC, Legislative Research Commission, over some late night and inappropriate text messages he was sending to others. We got a little more details now on it. One of those inappropriate messages apparently was inviting one of the women, supposedly, reportedly, one of the women he called exotic and beautiful at midnight, because, you know, when a guy's messaging you at midnight that you're exotic and beautiful, I'm sure there's no, inappropriate meanings to what he's doing, right? Especially when he's married, right? But ladies, if a married man is messaging you at midnight that you're exotic and beautiful, he is definitely not a good person, not being faithful to his wife. I think we can definitely put that into the misconduct category if that's the case. But apparently he was also inviting these ladies to a lesbian movie night. Now, he is a Democrat, and as I detailed in the Grossberg episode, Daniel Grossberg appears reportedly, supposedly, allegedly, was a cross-dresser / transgender, man-to-woman transgender in college. Reportedly, supposedly, he had wrote an article in The Advocate, I believe, or Out Magazine, a gay magazine, and a person by the name of Daniel Grossberg that was the same age as him, coming out of Grinnell, Iowa, where he was at that time, at that age. So it all lines up. It's the name, the place, the age, and he was a student too as well, and that's what it does say his occupation is. So right occupation, right name, right place, right age. And this was a while ago. I believe it was back in 2003 or so. And he wrote that he, of course, wanted to be a woman, dress up like a woman and everything else. So the misconduct, though, doesn't have to do with that, though he was inviting them to the lesbian movie night, which, as I said, he's just trying to be inclusive. I mean, Netflix offers it as a category, of course, LGBTQ movies, lesbian movie night. Maybe he just wanted to invite over a couple of ladies, watch some lesbian movies with them, and make them feel extra included because, that's the Democrat way, of course. Well, now it's come out that the young Democrats in the state are also calling on him to step down, stating that several members of their organization, which is Democrats under the age of 40, several members of their organization has also come out saying that Grossberg did also behave in an inappropriate manner with them. And this is kind of maybe a situation where the plug gets pulled and everything comes rushing forward, assuming if they all are accurate. Once again, these are all alleged situations, but I'm going to tell you that it kind of indicates to us he's possibly, obviously investigation needs to come forward, but when you suddenly see people like the Young Democrats and then also the House Democrat caucus calling on him to resign, expelling him, saying he needs to go, it tells you that where there's smoke, there's probably fire, and all these people have known for quite some time that Grossberg does this kind of behavior. And this is all just, once again, this is all alleged, okay? I'm just saying, we don't know any of this for a fact. I don't want to be sued for claiming that Grossberg is factually speaking having misconduct with women. He's just been alleged of doing so, under investigation for doing so, and it's so much so that the Democrat House Caucus and now the Kentucky Democrat Young Democrat Activism, which is like the party's Young Democrat kind of activist group, it's kind of part of the party apparatus, pseudo, is calling on him to resign. That means they feel pretty confident that he is guilty of what he's being accused of. Now, his lawyers come out, Anna White's, and saying, look, he's innocent of all this. There hasn't been any formal charges. He's not going to resign. He's not going to step down. All these people are crazy. They have no idea what they're talking about. He's a great man. He's a good man. He's a married man, very happily married. He would never do these things. But I don't think they'd risk it. Anybody who understands how politics works, the party itself, the caucus, the Young Democrats coming out and now jumping on the bandwagon of he needs to go means, to me, what I'm seeing is that they know it's true. They believe that he's been behaving this way for quite some time. They're trying to get ahead of the stories because they want to distance themselves from somebody that they know or they believe to know is exactly guilty of exactly what he's being accused of. That's the only answer I have for you for this kind of pile-on that we're seeing with Grossberg. Now, there's been a lot of discussion. Joe Biden's talked about term limits on the Supreme Court. He's wrong. But why do we need term limits at the federal level? That our system, we've broken it with some things that we allow in either direction for anybody, Republican and Democrat, to do, that has really made it very difficult to remove sitting members of Congress, sitting members of Senate, and it's because they're being protected by taxpayer funds. And we see a recent example of this coming out of Lexington, Kentucky, with a billboard that Andy Barr has put up. We will be going over that after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. Once again, if you want to reach out to the show, figure out other places to listen for the episodes that come out each and every day, almost each and every day. As I said, I've been a little busy these past few days, but still getting out 3-4 episodes a week. Head on over to theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. You can hit the Listen Now tab, hit the Contact tab, reach out to the show. We'll be back in a few short minutes. Are you a product, service, or business trying to reach conservative Kentuckians? Well, the Andrew Cooperrider Show can be exactly what you're looking for. Unlike anything else out there, the Andrew Cooperrider Show reaches conservative Kentuckians statewide through radio, TV, podcasting, social media, as well as email. Reach out to the Andrew Cooperrider Show to see if we have a marketing package that fits your budget. Reach out to the Andrew Cooperrider Show at theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. You can hit the Contact tab, or you can also email the Andrew Cooperrider Show at info@andrewshow.com. theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. Let's be the marketing solution that your business has been looking for. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before the break, I was talking about how Joe Biden was talking about term limits for the Supreme Court. Now, at the Supreme Court level, term limits is an absolutely horrible idea. There's a reason why judges at the federal level get lifetime appointments, because the idea is that you are removing yourself from the politics of the situation. When you need to worry about how you're going to get employment after this, when you're worried about how can you be, get your pay after you're in the Supreme Court, how can you remain to be important and special? Well, then you're going to make decisions based upon more about public opinion and less about what the law, black and white, says. And our founders recognize this. And in an attempt to ensure that our laws, our Constitution, our federal laws are interpreted not in a political way, but in a black and white legal way as much as possible, term limits have not been a thing in our judicial system. Instead, they're allowed to sit for, lifetime appointments. And they can be removed now. Congress can, of course, impeach them, but that takes a fair amount of agreement from Congress and, of course, the Senate. That means the behavior of these justices has to be pretty egregious. They have to go in a direction that everybody disagrees with. Or, at least a fair amount of people disagree with, right, in order to approach that impeachment threshold. And I think that's important. We want to make sure that in order for a justice to be removed, they have to be acting in an extremely egregious manner. But of course, the Democrats don't like that because the timing has just been such that we now have a conservative Supreme Court undoing some of the things that activist judges have done. Joe Biden's mad about it, and he's putting forward Supreme Court term limits. That's his idea, amongst some other things. And it is interesting, coming from Joe Biden, of course, who was in the Senate for 36 years. It is interesting to hear a person that was in the Senate 36 years talking about term limits. Kind of the opposite of the person you would expect to be talking about it, if I'm not mistaken there. But I do think, as long as we're on the topic of term limits, it's a bad idea for the judicial system because we don't want them to be accountable to the people. We don't want them to be accountable into anything other than the Constitution of the United States. That's, of course, the idea. Unfortunately, we have a lot of judges that, don't fall in line with that. But anyways, putting that to the side. But on this topic of term limits, I think it'd be a good time to talk about why our federal offices need term limits. Our Senate, our congressmen, and maybe not at the state level, at least here in Kentucky, they do not. And it has a lot to do with the amount of taxpayer help they get. And I was reminded of this the other day when I was driving here in Lexington. And I was inbound towards Lexington on one of the major streets, and I saw this billboard from Andy Barr. And it was a pretty basic, straightforward billboard talking about how he had voted yes on a piece of legislation and what that piece of legislation did. And then at the bottom, it didn't have a paid for by disclaimer. Instead, it had his government address. Additionally, on this show, I've talked about how I've received pieces of mail with similar situations where it's kind of, in a way, factually talking about a bill, but in another way being a little, superfluous in its description of the bill, definitely casting it in the best light it can, and talking about what he voted yes or no on in a quote-unquote informative manner. And the person who's paying for these things, and the reason why they don't have paid for it by disclaimers, and the reason why they're able to use his government website is because the people paying for it is you and I, the taxpayer. You see, through their quote-unquote constituent services, legislators, both in Congress and Senate, are able to do things like pay for people whose only job it is to make them look good, while also pay for things like mailers and billboards that talk about all they're doing for their constituents in the guise of some sort of customer service. But what is customer service but making sure people are satisfied with you? And what are elections but running for office based upon whether or not people are satisfied with you? We might as well call constituent services the re-election funds. That's exactly what they are. The entire job of both the constituent services and these expenditures on things like mailers, on things like billboards, is to continue to push these people in office. It's a reward, and it's on the back of the taxpayer. But that's not the only way these constituent services help people in the Congress and Senate stay in office. The other thing has to do with their volunteer staff. Now, I've talked about this a few times on the show in the past, but chances are, especially if you're a new listener, and I know there's a lot of new listeners to the show, you haven't heard me talk about this before. But what happens is that the legislators in Congress and the Senate, they get in their home state constituent services group. That's a fair amount of people, especially if you're a senator. You have regional people, you have office people. It's a pretty large staff. But what happens during election time is suddenly all these people, out of the kindness of their heart, start volunteering on that person's campaign, such as Andy Barr's campaign. A lot of his constituent services staff suddenly become campaign volunteers. It's interesting they become unpaid campaign volunteers because they end up, of course, the person who's approving their schedules, what they can do with their time and not do with their time, is the same exact person they're volunteering for. There are no requirements that they spend X amount of time in the office or X amount of time doing constituent services work. The person who decides whether or not to fire them or hire them is the exact person that they're volunteering for. It's taxpayer-funded campaign staff. And you don't just see this at the federal level. We also see this at the state level. For an example, when I was running statewide, we saw, at the time, state treasurer, but now auditor Allison Ball. We saw Ryan Quarles. We saw Mike Harmon. He was running for governor. We saw Michael Adams, of course, running for re-election of Secretary of State. Daniel Cameron, when he was running for governor, especially in the primary and then in the general. We see, and even Russell Coleman, who was not a current office holder in that way, but he was working for the federal government as the district attorney for the federal government, district prosecutor, and people out of his office were, quote unquote, volunteering on his campaigns. And people out of each one of these offices were volunteering on their campaigns. For an example, on a regular basis, I would see Allison Ball, then treasurer's head of things like lost property, volunteering to join her on various events to act as a handler, as a bagman, as a bit of an assistant in those situations to drive them as well. That person, these people are not being paid for by the campaign. They're being paid for out of the office. It's just expected that you go ahead and volunteer. Now, we do have term limits at our state office level, but when you get into Congress and Senate, the reason why term limits may be needed where it's not elsewhere, in my opinion, is because of the amount of taxpayer-funded help. The taxpayer-funded campaign staff, the taxpayer-funded constituent services, the taxpayer-funded marketing that we're now seeing become more and more blatant, especially since I've seen Andy Barr in place here, just seeing more and more blatant mailers and billboards that are clearly aimed at, of course, protecting him, and especially, too, as Andy Barr's eyeing up running for the Senate. And by putting in place those term limits, it at least gives us an opportunity to have occasionally, whether you think those term limits should be 12 years or 18 years or however long you think it should be, would give us the option to occasionally have a real election where we don't have taxpayer funds tipping the scale in one direction. Because when you look at the amount of help that some of these people are getting, take one person to assist on the campaign. I mean, that is a cost of probably $5,000 to $6,000 a month. If your campaign stretches a total of 6 months at a cost of $5,000 to $6,000 a month, that's a $30,000 to $36,000 assistance. Now you got multiple of those. Of course, a billboard like the one put up by Andy Barr could cost as much as $1,000 to $1,500 a month, depending on, of course, the fees negotiated. And so that tips the scale. And that's why we need to have term limits there. But at the state legislative level, when you go into our state house or state senate, they don't have staff to help them out. They're supposed to be a part-time legislature. At least in that case, they have, for an example, our state house reps, they have the Legislative Research Commission, which may write bills and things for them at request, but everybody shares that staff. And then they also have a assistant that is shared between 4 or so House reps at a time. In the House and the Senate, I think the ratio is a little bit lower, but they're sharing that staff in order to cut down costs. So they don't really have any kind of support staff. So what they're doing is when they're campaigning on their own. They don't have people being paid by the taxpayer that comes along to volunteer. At least most of them don't. Now, when you get into, of course, the Senate president and speaker, they have a lot more staff to, quote unquote, assist them. But I think that helps with term limits. Because, you hear people when it comes down to why we don't need term limits in Congress and Senate at the federal levels, they say, well, we have elections. If you don't like the job somebody is doing, well, we can simply go out and vote to remove them. But the problem with that statement, and you would hope that you'd be able to go ahead and follow through with that. You would hope that it would be accurately true that, yes, people could vote. But the problem is most people aren't well informed. They don't Google who they're voting for. We know this. Those who listen to the show for a long time know one of my biggest pet peeves is people not having issues or policy positions on their websites as candidates, and they really don't. In fact, if you go to Kamala Harris's website at the time that I'm recording this, she doesn't have an issues or policy page at all. Good luck trying to figure out what she's actually going to do in office, because people no longer vote on that kind of information. Instead, they vote based upon how much mail they get and these ads and whether or not they like them. We run into people all the time who say they like Andy Barr because they one time helped him out or his constituent services did XYZ for him. Well, ignoring the fact, if you talk to him, do you like the fact that we're in war in Ukraine? No, we don't. Do you like the money we've spent there? No, we don't. Do you like the ongoing spending? No, we don't. Do you agree or disagree with a variety of issues that Andy Barr has voted yes on? Well, no, we disagree with those. Okay. So you're going to go ahead and vote against him, right? No, of course not. They're going to continue to vote based upon that limited amount of information that they have, which is that information being furnished to them, of course, in many situations on the taxpayer's dime. And it's wrong. Well, coming up after this, we'll talk about the Louisville Police Department's woes continue sexual harassment lawsuit filed. We'll have that after this short break.
Lexington Overstock Warehouse is Central Kentucky's best source for stylish new home furnishings. Don't pay retail. With our low overhead operating structure and big name brands, we offer the absolute best values on new furniture for every room. Shop online anytime at LexingtonOverstockWarehouse.com or visit our weekends only showroom located at 156 West Tiverton Way. Right now, for listeners of this show, we're offering a special discount for our online customers. Use coupon code FREEDOM for an additional 10% off your online order today. Lexington Overstock Warehouse, low overhead equals really low prices.
And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Now, those of you who live in Louisville or have followed what's going on in Louisville know that Louisville is having a lot of troubles in their police department. And of course, they have the federal investigation going on, some cases involving that. University of Louisville just kind of threw them under the bus. But in some of these cases, we'll go over that probably on a different show. But one of the things that we've followed on this show has been the resignation of Chief Jacqueline and what led up to it. And for those of you who need a reminder, what had occurred, the straw that broke the camel's back. Well, there's a lot of issues going on. Of course, we had the Scotty Scheffler issue going on at the same time. We had the Slushygate issues. For those of you who don't know the story, apparently there was officers driving around throwing slushies at people on the street. And when it was discovered that police officers were going out and throwing slushies at people, the driver of that situation and the people throwing the slushies, the chief tried to go easy on. That was a big issue. There's a lot of issues with body cameras, including from the chief herself responding to situations. Nobody wearing body cameras in a lot of these high-profile cases, such as the Scotty Scheffler case, violating police protocol for that area. And then what really kind of put the icing on the top is a number of sexual harassment complaints just kind of came at the same time. And the one that really grabbed the attention was involving a Major Shannon Louder. And Shannon Louder, Major Louder, had recorded a call where she was being asked, they were going around in a circle, and the chief was asking about if it was okay, if anybody had any issue with her promoting Major Brian Kruger, K-U-R-I-G-E-R. So if it was okay to promote Major Brian Kruger, and if anybody had any issues working with him. And the person, and Shannon Louder, comes out and says, yes, I've been sexually harassed by Brian Kruger, and I would have an issue with it. And the chief then kind of ignored the comment, told her to come talk to her about it later, and then went forward and went ahead and promoted Major Brian Kruger anyways, which is the wrong way to handle that for a litany of things. I covered this at the time, but it's worth repeating that you should have, if you are a competent leader, first, before you ask that question publicly, is there any reason why people would have an issue with this promotion? You should ask that question privately. Any good leader, person who knows how to manage an organization, knows that when it comes to those kinds of important questions that you're going to ask publicly, where it's basically not a, hypothetical question, where it's literally like, I want an answer and this is an important question, you first ask that question privately to, prepare yourself for what the answer would be. You don't want to find out new information like this publicly. And now we know the chief didn't ask because we got the recording. And when we listen to the recording, we never once hear the chief say, look, I'd asked you this several hours ago, or I asked you this 2 days ago or yesterday, if you would have had any issues, and you never brought this up. Instead, she just kind of ignored it, continued on, and promoted her. Almost admonished Major Louder for even bringing it up in the first place. Well, this was recorded by Shannon Louder, it would appear, and then she provided that to the media, and then it got posted, leading, of course, to the mayor there in Louisville going ahead and suspending Chief Jacqueline, and then eventually firing her when more sexual allegations came out. Well, we're getting some information from Shannon Louder, who finally has filed her lawsuit against Brian Kruger, K-U-R-I-G-E-R, the one who was promoted, for what exactly his sexual misconduct is. And I'm going to go through the story with you, and I'm going to tell you, I have a lot of questions about what was any of these people thinking. Because we're going to go down this rabbit hole, and it's going to get interesting here real quick. In fact, it's going to get interesting in the first paragraph. So this is from WDRB. Let me read to you this first paragraph. It says, in the last several weeks, Major Shannon Louder and her husband, Lieutenant Jeff Louder, were accused in a lawsuit of grossly inappropriate behavior at an adult pool party in August of 2020, making sexual comments and advances towards another officer, Lauren Carby. Let's pause there. So, Shannon Louder and her husband, Jeff Louder, remember, Shannon Louder was the one who brought the accusations against Brian Kruger, leaked the audio, and then there was a lawsuit filed against Shannon Louder and her husband from another officer saying that they made sexual advancements towards them, like some sort of weird swingers, polyamorous type relationship situation, something just gross behavior. Definitely not honoring the monogamous relationship set before. If you're a Christian, you would believe in monogamous relationships, and certainly not honoring that, and certainly not honoring kind of the backbone of our society, the monogamous relationship that leads to healthy and happy children, healthy and happy couples. But regardless, so that's the backstory, but let's talk about this adult pool party in August of 2020. First off, for those of you who don't remember, August of 2020 was in the heart of this COVID time. And so the same people, remember, we weren't supposed to be gathering, right? We weren't supposed to be hanging out with one another, right? We had limited occupation. And who were the people that would be called to respond to situations where people are violating these COVID orders? In a lot of situations, it was the local police department. And so the same people who were tasked with and went about enforcing these COVID lockdown orders, now sometimes it fell to KSP, were themselves apparently violating them with a pool party. So while we're all locked down, the Louisville Police Department's having pool parties. Not only that, an adult pool party. Which leads to the question of, what did Lauren Carby, the officer who is now saying that they made sexual comments and inappropriate advances to her, expect to happen at the adult pool party? And I'm not trying to victim blame here, okay? I just want to point out a little bit of a situation, right? Now, first, when you're in a situation here where you can be sued for sexual misconduct with these people, if you say or do things wrong, you can legally be sued because you're like their employer, you're part of their command structure. There's that dynamic going on. You should never be having something called adult pool parties. You would think that would be self-explanatory. You would think that they would know better, right? That just goes to the core of the problems in Louisville in whole, is that somebody put together an adult pool party for a bunch of officers and said, no, nothing bad's going to happen here. And so, and they put, in the article, they're putting adult pool party in quotations, like that's what it was, like kids weren't invited. So you have a bunch of men and women exposing parts of their bodies, obviously men taking their shirts off, women probably in bikinis, no kids around, and you're surprised that it led to sexual comments and conduct that would be inappropriate for those people because they were, a part of the command structure. They were working together. I just got to ask, what is anybody at this department thinking? Like, this is an obvious problem, right? Like, you're a thinking human being, okay? Would you ever, think about your workplace, right? Would you ever think at your workplace having an adult pool party is a good idea? Not a family pool day where you bring your kids out, we'll get some inflatables, we'll get the ice, it's hot, right? We'll have a cookout maybe, we got a pool, so bring the kids along. And then it was like a gathering for the department, like a family day, and it just so happened that then Shannon and her husband Jeff made an approach. According to this report, it was an adults-only pool party. We are one paragraph in to this story. There's a few more paragraphs worth talking about that we'll go into after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. Listen up, my fellow business owners, because I got to tell you about a business that's incredibly important to any company's operations, and that's Amston, A-M-P-S-T-U-N, Amston. It's out of Richmond, Kentucky, and they provide cybersecurity for commercial businesses, and they've got dozens of years of experience working with government and private entities alike. So reach out to Amston today. That's AMPSTUN.com, AMPSTUN, Amston. Reach out to them today. Tell them Andrew sent you over. And you're back here in this final segment of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before the break, we were digging into now this lawsuit's been filed, that the lawsuit kind of surrounding the allegations that Major Shannon Louder made against Major Brian Kruger, that was leaked audio that led to Chief Jacqueline ending up quitting the force or being asked to resign, forced out by the mayor there. And we were talking about the situation leading into it. And so the story is that Shannon Louder and her husband, Jeff Louder, were themselves under investigation, were accused in a lawsuit of grossly inappropriate behavior at an adult pool party in August of 2020. We've talked about all the issues with that statement, and making sexual comments and advances towards another officer, Lauren Carby. Now we're going to go to the second paragraph of this story from WDRB. Now an internal investigation of the party has in part prompted a lawsuit by the couple claiming Shannon Louder was sexually harassed by a major in charge of investigating the incident, Major Brian Kruger. Shannon was sexually harassed by defendant Kruger during the investigative proceeding, according to the suit filed Monday in Jefferson Circuit Court. So now we have how it's shaping up. So Shannon says Brian had misconduct towards her. Remember, that's what was happening in the call. And that misconduct occurred when Brian was in charge of investigating Shannon and her husband for, I guess, trying to bring into their relationship another officer while at a pool party, an adult pool party. So I guess Brian allegedly thought, apparently they don't have a faithful relationship, so well, maybe I'll go ahead and shoot my shot here while I'm in charge of investigating her for sexual harassment, which is just ridiculous, to say the least. Reportedly trying to shoot his shot. Well, who knows if he really did or didn't. But, Anyways, we continue in the story. The handling of Shannon Lauder's internal complaints against Kruger prompted Louisville Mayor Craig Greenberg to ask for the resignation of Metro Police Chief Jacqueline Villaroli last month for how the chief handled a workplace sexual harassment allegation. In the lawsuit against Carby, Kruger, the city and former police chief, among others, the Louders claim the pool party allegations are false, and they have been the victim of harassment in a hostile work environment for years, in part due to rumors that Shannon Lauder had an affair with a subordinate. In addition, Shannon Lauder claimed she was sexually harassed by Kruger, the male officer leading the investigation into the alleged pool party, both before and during the investigation. This was not Shannon's first encounter with defendant Kruger, as they have been colleagues vying for similar positions in the past, and Shannon has been sexualized by him, according to the suit. Kruger, according to the lawsuit, made comments about Shannon Lauder's body, stalked new recruits on social media, and received lap dances from female recruits at training graduation parties. Yeah, guys, no lap dances at training graduation parties. Let's reserve that for, the high schools. For those of you who don't remember that Hazard High School, that principal, Happy, who was getting lap dances from cross-dressing males. Anyways, students, putting that to the side. LMPD takes seriously any allegations of sexual harassment, retaliation within the department, and multiple investigations that have been launched and are pending, LMPD said in a written statement Tuesday evening. These investigations are imperative given the conflicting narratives of recently filed lawsuits alleging malfeasance and sexual misconduct. While LMPD cannot comment on specific lawsuits, we'd like to reiterate that LMPD is committed to conducting expedient, thorough, and impartial investigations of sexual misconduct allegations once claims are brought to our attention. In his role of investigating the pool party, Kruger is accused of denying Louders the presence of union representative, not allowing Shannon Lauder to finish sentences, failing to review social media posts that allegedly proved some complaints and asked inappropriate questions. What appears to be the main catalyst promoting the chief's resignation stems from the May 2022 command staff meeting that was called to announce a series of promotions within the LMPD. And it goes on to talk about that call that happened and the claims. But what does this all have to do with? Let's just talk about all of this, right? Everything going on at the Louisville Metro Police Department. Slushygate, not following orders, gross behavior within the department, alleged gross behavior, but gross behavior, there shouldn't be a pool party with the word adult in the first place, ever. At any city function, nothing the city does should ever have that in there. All of this has to do with a complete and utter decay of our social structures and a complete and utter decay of our social norms. And on top of that, a complete decay of our morality. This is what happens when a city votes blue no matter what. They don't demand more from their leaders, but on top of that, their leaders themselves are purveyors of sexual immorality. When you have a party that is based around these kinds of things being okay, that the Judeo-Christian beliefs, maybe you don't want to sit there and say that the religion aspect of it is definitely a part of the conversation. Maybe you're one of those people who believes that freedom of religion means freedom from religion. It doesn't, but maybe you're one of those people who believes that, okay? Maybe you're one. At least you have to admit that when you have a party whose morality is not based in anything other than whatever you want to do, this is what's going to happen. The Republican Party's morality, for the most part, it is the party of quote-unquote Christianity, you'd say. They're definitely, I'm not saying every Christian is a Republican, but I want to say most Republicans are Christians, or at least have Judeo-Christian beliefs of some sort. They're religious. They believe in morality. They believe humans have inherent value. And so when you don't believe that, when you're the party of death, of destruction, the party of immorality, the party of none of this matters, it's all about you, of self-centeredness, you're going to promote cultures that are exactly the same way. You're not going to promote cultures where that kind of behavior is unthinkable. Who ends up getting and for those of you who say, what's this guy do with the Democrat Party? This is just part of the situation. If you don't think these political appointee positions that are appointed by these Democrat mayors, that are appointed by these Democrat council members, that are lorded over by these individuals, they are selecting people, and they're selecting them based upon politics. They're selecting them based upon whether or not they're Democrat in a lot of situations. Or if they're a conservative, well, we can't trust them to go ahead and be in that position. It's a political appointee position. Instead, we need to make sure their politics fall in line. Anything where you're reporting directly to the mayor, or you're even one position apart from reporting directly to the mayor, a lot of that has to do with politics, no matter the place, no matter the situation. And so while we're in the position where politics is ruling, the political beliefs are going to promulgate and create the general thought processes within organizations. And this is why these cities, when areas do vote Republican, they typically see less crime, they see better communities, as states do as well. When you talk about individual communities, when you look at even blue states, the bluest areas are the worst. Meanwhile, the reddest areas are the best. And it's because of that thought process. It's because of the morality that says the other humans around you are of value. They're not to be treated badly. Think about it this way. If you had a chief of police that was a truly strong Christian when it came to morality, that made it clear that we don't talk about these things here, that made it clear that what we do here is we show up, we do our job, we get it done, but we don't cross that line. And I get it, Chief Jacqueline says she's a Christian and is part of a DEI Christian nonprofit, whatever. And I'm not here to question her faith. But imagine if you had this stern, high morality, high standard chief that comes with a strong Christian. What do you think the result would be? Elections do have consequences, and this is the consequences of voting Democrat forever. You're going to end up with a police department whose morality is down the hole, who can't stop suing each other and do things like having adult pool parties. It's absolutely ridiculous. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We'll be back here hopefully Tuesday. You have a great rest of your